The other piece is, as we were looking at August 1993, we talked about you and Paul Roma winning the tag titles from Steve Austin and Steven Regal, who was subbing for an injured Brian Pillman. You remember that one. And on that same Clash of the Champions, we found out that the Shockmaster would be the fourth man on Sting's team for the War Games. We also discussed Rick Rude challenging Ric Flair for the world title at Fall Brawl. But before we get to the pay-per-view in Houston, Texas, we want to talk about the month of September and the events leading up to the pay-per-view. And Arn, this week we're going to open up our discussion on a historical moment for WCW, and that is they officially decided to withdraw from the NWA during this time period. And just as far as history lesson here, during the Crockett years, Jim Crockett was the recognized leader of the NWA. But when WCW purchased Crockett, the NWA and WCW were named and branded together, making the two entities almost interchangeable. Sometimes you'd be watching WCW shows, you'd still hear NWA references. And this arrangement, Arn, worked great until Flair leaves WCW in July 1991. And we know that he was fired by Jim Herd. He took that NWA, that big gold, beautiful belt with him. And then that's when Reggie Parks creates that WCW world title to take its place. Even before Flair returns to WCW, the big gold did and would be always called the NWA World Heavyweight title. That is until a meeting of the NWA was held on September 3rd here in Las Vegas. And Arn, the entire purpose of the meeting was to once again reestablish control. They wanted their hands back on that NWA World title. And the organization made up of non-WCW affiliated promotions wanted to have a say in who carried that title and who didn't, which makes sense, right? So here's the conference call, Arn. It includes Bill Watts, Todd Gordon, that's right, Todd Gordon from ECW, Paulie Dangerously, and Jim Cornette. And Arn, this leads us to our first fan question this week from Bryant Haremza. Bryant wrote, "This is the month when WCW officially withdraws from the NWA. By this point, did the NWA have any importance in your mind in WCW? Also, how did Arn feel knowing that the NWA was officially, hate to say it, a dead entity at this point?"
It was confusing.
Yeah.
The only way I can put it, from what I remember, is okay, this is the new company. They can call it whatever they want, but there's such a strong background in history with the NWA and the style, everything. WCW was patterned itself, a lot of the talent that was with Jim Crockett Promotions moved over. It was, I guess the only way I can put it is confusing.
Confusing. I think it was confusing, obviously, for fans too. Growing up, trying to figure out. I'm going to sit here and say it took me forever to figure out what happened with NWA and WCW. To me, as a kid, it was always the same company. There's Ric Flair, he's still here. Arn Anderson, it's similar guys. They're still Southern-based wrestling. Yeah, there were some changes in lighting and scenery, and now they're calling it World Championship Wrestling. But it wasn't until my later years and just doing a little bit of reading and research that it took to actually figure out what was the handoff. It was Ted Turner buying it. It was all the things that we're discussing now to kind of figure out how it all worked. But back then, it was super confusing as a fan.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, a little bit more history here. Officially, this conference I mentioned, agreed to the title change that was proposed for Fall Brawl with the understanding they would make the decision concerning who Rick Rude would drop the title to down the line. This never actually happened, as we'll discuss in 1994. Eastern Championship Wrestling, the last NWA territory, would become Extreme Championship Wrestling, led by Paul E., further complicating matters for the remaining members of the NWA. According to the Wrestling Observer, on or around October of 1992, Bill Watts, who replaced Fry as WCW's vice president in charge of wrestling operations, drafted a letter which was believed by NWA counsel to have been a bill of sale for the physical championship belt from the NWA to WCW for the $28,000 already paid by WCW. representing the NWA to Flair, which was signed by Sakuchi as NWA president. I'm sorry if I butchered his name. I know I did. Apparently, nobody from the NWA actually saw that letter or knew of its contents, other than it was known about a bill of sale later for what had become known in the industry as the Ric Flair Championship belt to WCW. Therefore, the NWA didn't even have the ability to make claim to owing the recognized title of the organization. Arn, I know that was a lot. Do you remember anything about the back and forth with the title?
I'm even more confused now than I was 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. No.